together with unbelievers. Don't be evenly yoked with unbelievers. What legitimate partnership does righteousness have with lawlessness? Yes, definitively that applies to marriage or dating. But there are so many ways in which we get so close to lawlessness, partnering with it or intermingling with it, and we are not maintaining a measure of separation. Listen, you probably work with pagans. That's okay. You probably have pagans next door, across the street. Go to school with them. Have friends that you've known for a large chunk of your life that are unbelievers. It's not that we cannot socialize with these people. It's not that we have to completely, get them out of our lives, but we need to maintain a distinction, a badal, a separation from their priorities, their lifestyle, their practices. Do you know what one of the first acts of God in the Bible was? There was creation, and then there was separation. He created, and he separated the light from the darkness. And that has been his MO ever since. To distinguish, to make sure that there was a very distinguishable line between the light and the darkness. And I've really been racking my brain this last week. Where do I cross that line? I'm not really sure. I don't really know always. Going to a movie, or to that particular movie, did I cross the line there? I don't know. I think that's something I need to investigate more deeply in my life. But I can't help but wonder if we flirt with that line between light and darkness more often than we need to. More often than we should, as we partake in the world's practices and priorities rather than God's. So that's the problem they're faced with. We have this intermixture of light and darkness, of the holy race and of the pagan races. And they at least bring this to Ezra's attention and say, we know that this is a problem, we know we have to do something about it, and we haven't, and we're coming to you, and we need your help. I think they expected him to just say, okay, you're right, it's a problem, let's work on this. I don't think they expected the reaction, and I don't think they anticipated what he prays in the rest of chapter 9. Chapter 9, we'll start by reading verses 5 through 7. This is Ezra's prayer in response. But at the evening offering, I arose from my humiliation, even with my garment and my robe torn, and I fell on my knees and stretched out my hands to the Lord my God. And I said, "Oh my God, I am ashamed and embarrassed to lift up my face to you. My God, for our iniquities have risen above our heads, and our guilt has grown even to the heavens since the days of our fathers. To this day we have been in great guilt, and on account of our iniquities, we, our kings and our priests, have been given into the hand of the kings of the land, to the sword, to the captivity, and to the plunder, and to open shame, as it is to this day." We'll stop there for just a second and kind of cover what he's doing. He's humiliated. Again, we see a word that we saw back in 8:22. In 8:22, we talked about how Ezra was a little embarrassed to ask the king for help because what had he been telling the king? They're going to travel back, and he's a little embarrassed to tell the king, hey, we need a military escort, because he's been telling the king, hey, we've got God, God's all-powerful, and God's going to protect us. So that's the first time that the word bosh, to be ashamed, shows up in the book of Ezra. Here's the second time. That's actually kind of a good reason to be ashamed or concerned. I don't know what the best English translation of that is, but he was concerned about bringing this request to the king. In verse 6, he is genuinely ashamed and embarrassed. I don't even think embarrassed is a strong enough word. Humiliated, ashamed, distraught. Completely beside himself. His humiliation is both physical and spiritual. It's amazing how much his external activities are reflecting his internal confession. He's tearing his garments, he's pulling out the hair on his head, he's falling to his knees, and he stretches out his hands to the Lord. This is not someone who is just talking about confession. This is someone who is genuinely, legitimately aware of how wrong, how evil the sin that has been committed is. What I want you to notice, too, that I find fascinating is that in verse 6, he uses the first person pronoun a few times. I am ashamed to lift my face on you. But then halfway through the verse, he switches to what kind of pronouns? First person, plural pronouns. Our heads, our guilt has grown into the heavens. You know, it'd be so nice to just say, man, these people are terrible. I can't believe what they have done. He identifies with the sin and the shame of the believing community. Which tells me a few things. It tells me that they are indeed believers. Okay, if they were rank pagans, I don't think he'd identify with them. They have done terrible things. They have set their lives on a terrible course by intermarrying with these foreign peoples. That does not mean that they're no longer believers. I believe that they are genuine believers in the God of the Old Testament, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But they have made bad decisions, wrong decisions. They have ignored the word of the Lord and put the nation on a disastrous course. And he identifies with them. He doesn't isolate himself and say, man, I've been good. I'm not participating in this, but look at what these people are doing. There's a humility, a lack of condescension here in what he is saying. I like how one person put this. What an example for anyone who would walk with God today and want to rebuke to the Phariseeism that would coldly point out the failure of others while professing to have no part in it oneself. And he's not saying, you people are terrible, I got to fix it. He's identifying with what his people are going through. What is interesting, too, to me is that just as Ezra sees continuity, and we've seen this, as Ezra has written the book of Ezra, he's shown continuity with the past, with the way David set up the temple workers and the temple singers. We've seen continuity with the worship of the pre-exilic days. We've seen continuity with the genealogies, with the worship practices. But now Ezra identifies continuity with the past in terms of the sin of the past. He's not saying, wow, this sin has just kind of sprung up. He's saying we are identifying both with all the good things of the past, but unfortunately we have carried all the bad things of the past with us as well. And I think that's why he goes into all that in verse 7. Since the days of our fathers to this day we've been in great guilt. And he lists some of the specifics of this guilt. He says our kings and our priests have been involved in this. This is not a grassroots movement, this guilt and this sin. This has risen to the highest echelons of our society. And the leaders are leading in sin, in wrongdoing, in rebellion from God's word. It's really interesting to read the account of Noah. And you know the story, there's the boat, there's the rain, there's the 8 of them, and they get off of the boat, and they sacrifice, and think, oh man, everything's great now. We have taken care of the sin problem. And then it's kind of a disturbing story what happens next. Noah, he plants a vineyard, and he gets schlocked, and he's laying there all drunken, and there's some impurity apparently that happens both with him, and then his son looks upon his nakedness and the shame. And at the end of Noah, this very godly man, at the end of his life, at the end of his story, you think, you know what? We haven't really taken care of the sin problem, have we? We have fixed some of the symptoms. We have God wiped out perhaps millions of people who were causing a problem. But if we still have the human nature, we still have sin. And I wonder if Ezra, coming back to the Holy Land, coming back to the Promised Land, and he's thinking, you know, this exile, this Babylonian captivity, was going to help us take care of these sin issues. And Ezra comes back, and within a few months of the time that he arrives, he meets up hard and fast with the fact that the sin issue is still there. Now, some of the problems of the pre-exilic time does not seem to reappear in the post-exilic time. Like we talked about before, idolatry. We do not seem to have idolatry. We do not seem to have just the syncretism religiously with the non-Jewish people. But apparently they're okay getting married to them. And that's going to create some syncretism as well. And I can't help but wonder if Ezra himself is somewhat disillusioned. So there is still rampant, widespread sin in the post-exilic community. The sin problem has not been fixed. And the people of God need a permanent solution to the sin problem. They're going to deal with another of the symptoms here in Ezra 9 and 10. But it helps them to yearn for a Messiah who will fix and eradicate the sin problem once and for all. Only Christ did that and is doing that and will fully accomplish that in the future. So where do we leave off? Verse 7, let's read a couple more verses here. Starting, in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and read the rest of it and we'll go back and talk about it. Ezra chapter 9, verse 8. But now, for a brief moment, grace has been shown from the Lord our God to leave us an escaped remnant and to give us a peg in his holy place, that our God may enlighten our eyes and grant us a little relieving in our bondage. For we are slaves, yet in our bondage our God has not forsaken us, but has extended loving kindness to us in the sight of the kings of Persia, to give us reviving, to raise up the house of our God, to restore its ruins, and to give us a wall in Judah and Jerusalem. Now, our God, what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken your commandments, which you have commanded by your servants the prophets, saying, the land which you are entering to possess is an unclean land, with the uncleanness of the peoples of the land, with their abominations which have filled it from end to end, and with their impurity. Verse 12. So now do not give your daughters to their sons, nor take their daughters to your sons, and never seek their peace or their prosperity, that you may be strong and eat the good things of the land, and leave it as an inheritance to your sons forever. After all that has come upon us for our evil deeds and our great guilt, since you, our God, have requited us less than our iniquities deserve, and have given us an escaped remnant as this. Shall we again break your commandments and intermarry with peoples who commit these abominations? Would you not be angry with us to the point of destruction until there is no remnant or any who escape? Verse 15, O Lord our God of Israel, you are righteous, for we have been left as an escaped remnant as it is this day. Behold, we are before you in our guilt, for no one can stand before you because of this. So let's go through and let's kind of hash through this a little bit. In verse 8 he says, and now despite what has happened in the past, you have shown us your grace. There has been a remnant, and the post-exilic community sees themselves as a unique remnant that God has preserved for the carrying on of the Jewish people, so that they can continue to be a holy nation for the Lord. And he mentions this thing about a peg. There's a remnant or a peg in the holy place, and enlightenment from God, despite continued opposition and oppression. This, I put on number 2 underneath the prayer of Ezra. The mention of a nail or a peg is the word yuded, actually, in verse 8. This might be a reference to Isaiah 22:23, which is a messianic prophecy. And I'm not sure if Ezra is specifically trying to say we're on the verge of this messianic fulfillment in our own day, or if he's just trying to relate to what Isaiah has said here. But I think the idea is God has spared us because he is preserving his people, not just to build a holy temple, but to be a holy people. And I just think Ezra is maybe seeing a partial fulfillment of that messianic prophecy in his own day. It's a very unique word that is not used very often. Hard to imagine he didn't have Isaiah 22 in his mind. And also maybe Zechariah chapter 10, verse 4 as well. I'll let you look those up on your own. And he's saying, listen, you have done all of these things for us. You've enlightened us. You've granted us reviving Even though politically we're still under the thumb of the Persians,